There, that's better. Okay, so thanks. Really kind of honored to be asked to give a talk, having seen so many of the talks from the Bay Area bird photographers meetings, and so many people are such great photographers. I will give a little introduction here and then start talking about some of the pictures I've taken. So first, I just wanted to say that I really consider myself to be a wildlife photographer, not a bird photographer and not a birder. And that's not because I have anything against people who like to go watch birds, because I think that's really great. And I don't have anything against people who specialize in bird photography. But I really like to take pictures of anything that I see in its native environment. But if you said, what is my favorite thing to take pictures of, then I like to take pictures of parrots in the wild. I want to emphasize that I am an amateur photographer. And this is something I have to keep reminding myself because there's so many spectacular wildlife photographers out there. And I just have to remind myself, no, it's not, I'm not doing this for a living. And one of the things that I really think is great about liking to take pictures of parrots is that when you're wandering through the jungle looking for parrots, you see lots of other things to take pictures of, which is something I really enjoy. Oh, doesn't want to let me advance the slide. A lot of times I get asked why I like parrots so much, and I really don't have a very good answer for that. My wife Kathy and I first got interested in parrots in the 1970s, and I've sort of been a parrot fanatic since then. In my usual obsessive way, I've read a great deal about parrots, and I really wanted to see them in the wild. So I thought I'd give a little background about parrots themselves. There are currently about 350 species of parrots, but that number is increasing due to DNA sequencing. So when you do DNA sequencing of a species and you look at the different subspecies, you can see how similar their DNA is to each other. And if they're not, if there's a certain number of differences, then they say, oh, they're not subspecies, they're really species. So it's sort of increasing over time right now. And in fact, I have a slide where I can show one of these that's recently been split. Interestingly, about a third of these species are threatened with extinction. If I define being threatened with extinction being either vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, or extinct in the wild on the IUCN Red List. And the main reasons for the trouble that parrots are having is habitat loss, and that's really a big problem because they like trees, so logging is bad. Deforestation is bad when land is converted to pastures or cropland. And then parrots are popular pets, and so poaching for the pet trade is still a problem. For this talk, I'm going to focus on trips that I've made to South and Central America with the goal of seeing as many parrot species in the wild as possible and to photograph as many of them as I can. I made all my parrot photos available to the World Parrot Trust and other conservation organizations that are interested in birds and parrots for their use and their materials. So if you know of any such organizations that you think might like my photographs, let me know, because I love giving them to people to use for those purposes. The first trip that I took to do parrot photography was in 2016, and I went to Peru. The trip was organized by an Englishman named Steve Brooks, who runs a small company called Wild Parrots Up Close. So he takes you on these trips, and the goal is to see lots of parrots. Steve really is a parrot fanatic and goes to great lengths to get you to see as many species as you can because he wants to see them as well. He's really great at organizing the trips. I decided I was going to go on this trip, but unfortunately my wife Kathy couldn't do so because she had to work. And but I went anyhow. And I took photographs of 11 parrot species on this trip. At the time of this trip, I did not own a camera. So I started to look into what camera I should purchase for the trip because I thought I should take some pictures. And I have to say, I was completely overwhelmed when I started looking at cameras. There were a million cameras available. I had no idea which one would be the best one. But while doing this, I discovered I could rent a camera. So I rented a Sony RX10 III Super Zoom camera. This is a Super Zoom camera with a lens that's supposed to go from 24 to 600 millimeter equivalents. Of course, at the time, I had no idea what the equivalent meant. And the sensor on the camera is a 1-inch 20 megapixel sensor. And I put this picture up because I was so excited when I took this picture. It's one of the first pictures I took on this trip with this camera. And it's a picture of a group of parrots on a clay lake, and there are 5 species of parrots in this picture. There's a blue-headed macaw, there are orange-cheeked parrots, there are blue-headed parrots, there's a mealy parrot, and there's a yellow crown parrot. So 5 species in one picture. I just couldn't believe it. So I said they were on a clay lick. Well, what is a clay lick? A clay lick is a great place to go see parrots. And they're just a cliff along a river. And the parrots come into the cliff early and they eat the clay. So you have to get up early. Well, that's nothing new. Whenever you're taking wildlife pictures, you get up early. But here you get up early because you want to be at the river before the sun rises. And then you're usually in a hide across the river from where the clay lick is. It's not really clear why the parrots eat the clay, but 2 reasons have been proposed. One is to supplement their diet, perhaps with sodium. And it's also clear that the clay binds toxins. So perhaps it binds some toxins in their diet that prevents the toxin from being absorbed so the parrot can eat without getting poisoned. And this is a picture of red and green macaws at a clay lick. You can see here there are some birds that are, the parrots have actually dug holes in the cliff wall as they eat the clay away. And at this time, an alarm call was given by the lookout parrot, so they all just take off all at once off the side of the cliff. And this is another picture from a clay lick showing two other macaws in the same genus as the blue and green macaws, Scarlet macaws and blue and yellow macaws. All 3 macaws who I've shown you so far, that is the red and green, the scarlet and the blue and yellow, are listed as least concern on the red list, and they're not in danger of becoming extinct, although the population of all 3 is decreasing at this time. Another macaw that we saw on this trip were red-bellied macaws. This shows a picture of a group of them who were sitting on this dead palm trunk, just demolishing it. I'm not sure what they were trying to eat from it, but they were just tearing it apart. And these macaws live in association with these palm trees. They're called mochi palms, and they grow in swamps. This is a pretty unusual parrot. It's the only member of their genus, but they don't do well in captivity. They really can't be kept in captivity because their diet is so specialized. So there's no poaching, and they live in swamps, so there's not much habitat loss. And so right now they're at least concerned on the IUCN Red List. And I put this picture up because it's the first picture that I got of a bird in flight. And I got this picture and I just thought it was such a great picture at the time. But I think you'll see as I go on, I learned that birds in flight weren't quite so easy to take pictures of. This is a blue and yellow macaw, and you can look, he actually has a piece of clay in its beak as it's flying away from the clay lick. So what did I learn when I went on this trip to Peru in 2016? I learned that I really loved wildlife photography. I was just having so much fun taking pictures of the animals that we saw, and very excited to see the parrots that I saw and to get pictures of them. I also learned it was pretty hard to get photos of birds in flight, and I certainly decided that the most important camera property for good wildlife photography was good autofocus. And that super zoom camera that I rented in my hands was not up to the task. And the other thing I learned is I really should take my wife on these trips. Mm-hmm. So at about the time I got back from this trip to Peru, Nikon released the D500 camera, which is a crop sensor camera. And at the same time, they released a new zoom lens. It was a 200 to 500 millimeter f5.6 zoom. So it was f5.6 at 200 and at 500 millimeters. All the reviews that I read of this camera said that it had the best autofocus system ever. So it sounded great. And the camera and the lens were sold together as the ultimate wildlife photography kit. So I bought them. So at the beginning of 2017, then I now had my D500 and my zoom lens. And I asked Steve Brooks if he would arrange a tour for my wife and me to go to Brazil. Steve had scheduled a trip to Brazil and we couldn't go with him. And I requested 3 goals. I said I wanted to see Lear's macaws, and we'll talk about them in a bit. I wanted to see as many parrot species as I could, and I really wanted to see a jaguar. So we set up the trip. It turned out that Steve's trip that he was hoping to go on got canceled, so he actually came along on the trip, which was great. So the first bird that I wanted to see were the Lear's macaws, and these are a macaw that's found in the northeast of Brazil in an area called the Caatinga. And the Caatinga is a dry and barren place. You know, we always think of Brazil as being a rainforest, but up in that northeast corner, it's a desert. So to get there, we had to fly to Sao Paulo. We got to Sao Paulo. We got in some trucks and we drove for 8 hours to get to where we were going. Our total travel time to get there was more than 24 hours. And when we got there, there really weren't any amenities for tourists. They weren't set up to take care of tourists. There wasn't a lot there. But nonetheless, this is where the Lear's macaws were. In the 3 days that we were there looking for the Lear's macaws, we drove in pickup trucks and did more than 500 miles of driving. But we did see some Lear's macaws. I thought I'd show you a picture of what the Caatinga looked like. So when I said it was like a desert, I meant it. You can see there are all these spiky plants and cactus, and it's really dry. And here's a picture of a Lear's macaw. They're really beautiful macaws. They're big. They've got this, their other name is indigo macaw because they've got this beautiful blue color, little green tint to the head, and then the yellow skin around their eye and beak. And here's another photograph of a Lear's macaw. We saw about 200 Lear's macaws on this trip, and almost all of them were sitting around a farmer's cornfield, and they had eaten every single ear of corn in the field, dropping many of them just looking really good, but they'd taken one bite, decided it wasn't any good. And you can see the picture I have here is of a macaw. He's eating an ear of corn. Well, there are only about 1,400 Lear's macaws in the wild. So we saw more than 10% of them in this trip, which is just amazing. And they really are sort of a conservation success story. When they were sort of a mystery bird, people saw them in the pet market, but no one knew where they came from. And in 1983, when they discovered that they were from the Caatinga, there were only about 60 birds left. Now there are 1,400, and they've been downlisted from critically endangered to endangered, but they still are endangered. And I just put this picture up because this is my most common picture of Lear's macaws. They're flying away from me. It didn't seem to matter how careful I was, how quiet I tried to be, or how I hunched down, got behind trees. If they saw me, they just took off and flew away. They were just unbelievably wary. Well, there are other birds that lived in the Caatinga, and we saw cactus parakeet. Here's a picture of one. You can see that the bush he's eating on looks like it's pretty dried out, but it had a fruit on it, and he was going at it. Blue-crowned parakeets, also least concern. They're found in many environments, but also in the Caatinga. After we were done with the Caatinga, we went to the Pantanal, which is an area in southwest Brazil. So we had to take 2 flights to get there, and then a long van ride. This is a huge area that floods in the rainy season and dries out slowly after the rains. The classic parrot of the Pantanal is the Hyacinth macaw. They're in the same genus as Lear's macaws, but these are the largest macaws based on length. You can see they look a little similar to the Lear's macaws with a beautiful blue color and the yellow skin around their eye and beak. I really like these because when you look at them, they always look like they're smiling. And they're just such beautiful birds. They're vulnerable on the red list, so threatened with extinction, but the birds in the Pantanal are actually increasing at this time, which is kind of a relief. Here's one bird flying into a tree hollow that it's trying to take a look at to see if it's a nest site or not. I think the tree looks a little too small, but who am I to say? One of the things that was really amazing that we saw on this trip was tool use by the hyacinth macaws. I just read a paper about hyacinth macaws before leaving on this trip where they described that the macaws would use sticks to help them eat. And you can see in this picture that the parrot has a a kernel from a palm tree in its beak, and it's laid a stick across the back of it to prevent the kernel from turning in its beak as it bites down on it. I just was amazed. I mean, you just read about it in a scientific paper, and then there's this macaw in the wild doing this using a tool to eat. Other birds that we saw in the Pantanal, we saw a turquoise-fronted parrot. Now, this parrot is also called a blue-fronted parrot, or a blue-fronted Amazon, or a blue-fronted Amazon parrot. There are all these names running around for these birds, and some of the new names like turquoise-fronted just drives me crazy because there's no one in the United States that calls this a turquoise-fronted parrot. They all call it a blue-fronted Amazon. It's near threatened on the red list, and the reason is that it's a high demand as a pet. It's a good talker, so people like them as pets, and they're being poached quite a bit. This is a yellow or golden collared macaw. We were canoeing down a river and came around a corner, and I saw these 3 macaws eating these little berries in this tree. Got the canoe guy to stop the canoe, and the parrots just sat there and ate. This is a shy species. It's hard to get a picture of them, and they just seemed completely unconcerned about our being close while they were eating. They are least concern on the red list, but pretty exciting to see them. Here's another picture to show they just sat there and calmly ate these green berries. This is a yellow chevron parakeet, also least concern on the red list. It's a commonly kept pet bird, but they're very common in the wild. Here it was eating the part of the palm tree that has the pollen on it. You can see the pollen on its beak. This is a Nande parakeet. This is a commonly kept bird as a pet, but they're easy to breed, so they're not being taken out of the wild very much. They're a member of a genus called Caatinga. Caatinga used to have more than 20 birds in the genus, and then DNA sequencing came along, and it turned out that there were 4 different genuses enclosed within Caatinga. And the Nande parakeet was one of the ones that remained in that genus. And interestingly, it was closely related to the sun parakeet, the Nande parakeet, and the golden cap parakeet, which all have yellow heads. And this one has a black head, and yet it was closely related. These are monk parakeets, also called Quaker parakeets because of their gray hoods. This is the only, this genus is the only genus of parrots that build nests, and they build these huge stick nests that are communal. Multiple pairs will have a nest cavity in this mass of sticks. They often will nest in the bottom of a jabiru stork nest because that's a huge pile of sticks, and so they'll add a few at the bottom and use that as a nest for themselves. This is a pretty common bird in the wild, and there are also feral populations of these birds all over the place. I've seen them in Miami Beach. They even have a feral population in Chicago. The last stop on this trip, we then went down into the Amazon basin itself. We went to a lodge called Cristalina Lodge in the Amazon. And this lodge is known for its 2 canopy towers. Canopy towers are platforms that are put at the very tops of trees in the rainforest. So you're way up in the canopy, and you reach them by climbing a staircase that's been built around the tree and around and around and around, because you go up between 90 and 100 feet above the ground to get to the top of the canopy. The first parrot that we saw in the canopy were these yellow-tailed parrots that were feeding on these little fruits. It's hard to keep up with the names of the parrots, as I said, and this bird is known in the pet trade as a white-bellied caike, but caike is not supposed to be used anymore by the new names. Same thing with conure, a name for parakeets, so we're done with those. But very recently, this species is divided into 3 species based on the DNA sequencing, which is really has major implications for conservation, because now we've taken a bird that we thought we had X number of, and actually all species have 1/3 of X in the wild. So 2 of the 3 species are threatened with extinction by the IUCN, have been determined to be threatened with extinction by the IUCN. And this is also important for people who breed these birds in captivity, because they shouldn't be hybridizing the species. You should be keeping them separate. This is one of the ones that's threatened with extinction now, called the Yellow-tailed Parrot now, and it's vulnerable on the red list. One of the great things about the canopy tower is you just sit up there and things fly by. And I was very fortunate that a group of Scarlet Macaws flew by. I was able to get a pretty nice flight shot of these beautiful parrots. A small flock of white-eyed parakeets flew by. These are also least concern. They're a small parakeet that used to be in the genus Caatinga, but has now been moved out into their own genus. This is the Crimson-bellied Parakeet. These birds were quietly eating the same fruits as the Yellow-tailed Parrot was eating, and almost didn't see them because they were so quiet. And you can see that on the picture on the left, they really can camouflage themselves pretty well with their beautiful greens and blues. But then they turn around and they just have this amazing red belly and just stunningly beautiful. And they are also threatened with extinction at this time. They're vulnerable on the red list. And then I know that this is supposed to be a bird talk, but I did mention that we went to see jaguars, and we did see jaguars, and I was pretty excited. So here's a picture of a jaguar resting on the sandbank at the side of the river. And here's another picture of a jaguar. I really like this picture because I call it what you don't want to see when you're walking in the Pantanal. Fortunately, we were on a boat in the river when we saw this. The thing that's interesting about these jaguars in the Pantanal is they're very well studied. And the spot pattern of a jaguar is unique to each jaguar, just like our fingerprints are unique to each person. So if you take a picture of a jaguar, you can go and look online and you can figure out which jaguar it is. And this jaguar is a female jaguar, and her name is Hunter. So that was Brazil. I really had a great time on that trip. So we decided we'd go to Ecuador. The tour organizer, who organized a number of trips to South America, told me I should go on this Ecuador trip, as this was his trip that he organized. You'd see lots of parrots. Well, actually, the trip was not much of a parrot trip. It was really focused on hummingbirds. We saw many hummingbirds, and hummingbirds are pretty remarkable. Really fun to see them, but we only saw 5 species of parrots, and they were all at one place. The clay lick that we saw them at was sort of an unusual place where the parrots didn't really eat the clay, but they were drinking water at the bottom of a cliff. The water was running through the cliff and pooling at the bottom. And I think that the water must have had the substance that the parrots wanted in it, because they would drink the water. Before we went on this trip, Nikon came out with the D850. And I decided to get one because the sensor was a 46 megapixel sensor. It got great reviews, and it used the same autofocus system as the D500. So I went to a full frame camera, and because it had so many pixels, if I cropped it to a crop sensor size picture, it still had the same number of pixels on it as the D500. So I didn't lose anything by using it, but if I could get close to something, I'd get more pixels on the subject. So here's a picture of Scarlet Macaws at this clay seep. You can see the water seeping out of this wet cliff, and the parrots are actually drinking the water. This is one of my favorite pictures. There's an orange-cheeked parrot that's kind of sitting in this chaos of cobalt-winged parakeets who are just flying in and out. You can see them all trying to get their drink of water, pushing each other out of the way, flying in and out. He was just sitting there looking a bit nonplussed, wondering what was going on. The orange-cheeked parrot's one of my favorite parrots, is threatened, and the cobalt-winged parrots are least concern on the red list. And this is a scarlet-shouldered parrotlet, what we saw. They looked at the water at this clay lick, but they didn't go down. They were an unusual parrot to see at this location, although they had been reported there. But unfortunately, their scarlet shoulders, which they're named after, you can't see unless they've got their wings open. The birds in this genus are called parrotlets because they're pretty small, but their body shape and their tail make them look like a parrot. So they're just called parrotlets. And they are also vulnerable on the red list. So what did I learn on the Ecuador trip? Well, I say unfortunately, but really it was fortunate. There were some really outstanding wildlife photographers on this trip. And every time we sat down at the end of the day and compared our photos, I thought that their photos were sharper than mine. And I was told that this was because they were shooting prime lenses and I was shooting a zoom lens. So I decided to get a prime and debated with myself quite a bit whether I should get a 500 millimeter or 600 millimeter prime. Of course, the 600 millimeter cost more, but it also had more reach. So I just decided I'd go with what everyone always says, you'll always want more reach when you're shooting wildlife. So I bought the 600 millimeter lens. Yeah, my wife's reminding me. I bought the lens and then told my wife this was my Hanukkah present, but also my birthday present, anniversary present for that year and for the next 3 years. But anyway, this is sort of my standard kit for a lot of the pictures that you're going to see now is a D850 with the Nikkor 600 millimeter f4 fluorine FL lens. And these photographers also taught me to pay attention to my background, so I hope you'll notice my backgrounds get better as we go along here. The next trip we took was also in 2018. We went to Peru. This time Kathy came along, and this was also organized by the person who organized our Ecuador trip. The focus was again on birds, and again hummingbirds, but also tanagers, which I really like. And just the amazingly beautiful Andean cock of the rock, sort of a bizarre looking bird that's really beautiful. But we also did visit a clay lick and we saw six species of parrots at the clay lick. This is a picture of one of the red and green macaws flying from the clay lick to the trees around the clay lick. Really is one of my favorite pictures that I've taken. And it wasn't that hard to get birds in flight here because they were flying down to the clay lick and back to the trees, back and forth. These are really big birds. They're 3 feet long from the tip of the tail to the tip of their head, and so they're pretty stunning when you see them. And here's another picture of the red and green macaws. They were the dominant bird at this clay lick. There were a lot of them there. The standard flock of a parrot, that when you see them, is a pair. Sometimes you'll see more than a pair, and then it's usually a pair and their offspring from that year. That doesn't mean that they don't group in bigger groups other times, but it's very common to see mated pairs of parrots. They mate for life, and they stay together all year. I like this picture because it's a pair, and look at how perfectly synchronized they are in flight. Even the tips of the primary flight feathers are curved the same, and it's just really remarkable. And I also ask you to notice that they have these red lines of feathers on their face, and that's just important for identification. We also saw blue-headed parrots at this clay lick. This is a reasonably common parrot, although I think that they're really beautiful. They're at least concerned on the red list. And here are showing you who weren't shy about going to the clay lick, and you can see they're just chomping chunks of clay off of the clay lick. Excuse me. Also at this clay lick, we saw tui parakeets, which are these little parakeets here, and yellow-crowned Amazon parrots. And I really thought this was kind of neat because I think the tui parakeets just look like they're miniature yellow-crowned parrots. They're about 6 inches long, and the yellow-crowned Amazon parrots are about 14 inches long, so that they really differ in size, but they look a lot the same. So I guess that being green with a yellow forehead is a popular parrot color. But these are both listed as least concern, which is good. One of the places that we stayed on this trip had a palm tree growing on the grounds, and there was a severe chestnut-fronted or severe macaw nest site in one of the palm trees. The picture on the left shows one of the chestnut-fronted macaws on the pollen-bearing part of the palm tree, kind of looking at us to see if it's safe to go into the nest. And then one of them went into the nest and then looked out again to be sure it was safe. These are the smallest macaws in the genus Era, but they're also least concerned on the red list. Oh, it doesn't want me to let me go. The next trip we took was in 2019. We went to Bolivia. This trip was set up again by Steve Brooks, but really run by Jose Antonio Diaz, who is the director of the Foundation for the Conservation of Bolivian Parrots, called the Fundación de Conservación Loros Bolivia. And our goal was to see the 2 endangered macaw species of Bolivia. And we did succeed in seeing them, but we saw more than 20 species of parrots on the trip, and I got good photos of 20 of them. Unfortunately, I retired just before this trip and was riding my bicycle and was hit by a car. And I dislocated my right shoulder. When I went to see the orthopedic surgeon, he said, I'll fix it next week. And I said, I can't, because in 10 days I'm going to Bolivia. And he said, you're crazy. And I said, how long can I wait? He said, I can wait 6 weeks. And I said, well, I'll be back in 4 weeks. Let's do it then. So I had to put my arm in a sling for the whole trip, and I really couldn't handle my 600mm lens, which weighs 8.5 pounds. So I got a new lens. I got a Nikon 500mm f5.6 PF lens. It only weighs 3.2 pounds. So I was able to take pictures. But I have to say that this Bolivia trip was a tough trip. We drove a lot. The roads were not good. A lot of dirt roads, washboard, potholes, and they really weren't set up again for tourists. So the accommodations were okay, but they were pretty Spartan. Sometimes we had trouble finding food to eat, but even worse, the photography was really hard. And one of the reasons was that it was hot. And so the sun would come up and you'd start to shoot. And then 20 minutes later, the temperature would be hot enough that it was already making heat diffraction of the air. So you'd get a shimmer in the air and the heat, and you couldn't focus anymore. But nonetheless, they're doing more of these trips because we saw a lot of parrots. And if you're really a parrot fan, I think you should go, because you'll see these macaws, which is pretty exciting. So here's a picture of the first of the critically endangered macaws that live in Bolivia. This is called a red-fronted macaw. You can see the red forehead on the green bird. These birds actually live in river canyons in a dry part of Bolivia. The cliffs you can see the cliff in the background here. They're really pretty bare. And the real vegetation is on the riverbed itself. So the birds will fly down to the river to eat, and they go back up on the cliffs. And there are no trees around, so that they actually roost and nest in cavities, in caves in the cliffs, which is unusual, but not unheard of for parrots. And this species is really critically endangered. There are only about 600 of these birds left in the wild. Remarkably, there are more of them in captivity in the United States than there are in the wild in Bolivia. Jose Diaz and his organization is trying hard to protect these parrots and reinforce their population in the wild. They're really kind of beautiful birds, I think, with the green and the red and the blue. And I just put this picture up to give you an idea of when we were shooting. I like the picture because it shows the red under the wing. But you can see that the sun is really low. It's just barely come over the edge of the cliff when I took this picture. And 20 minutes later, I couldn't take pictures anymore. It was just a tough trip for photography. In the same canyons that the macaws lived in were, again, the turquoise-fronted parrots. Here's a couple of shots of them, a trio in flight, and one that decided to perch near where we were sitting on the top of the cliff. And these are cliff parakeets. If you look at them, you'll think they look a lot like the monk parakeets. That I've previously shown you a picture of. And indeed, they used to be considered subspecies of monk parakeets. But again, DNA sequencing has shown that they're not so closely related. So they've been split off into a separate species in the same genus. And this is a green-cheeked parakeet. We really tried hard to get pictures of these birds, and they were unbelievably wary, really well camouflaged in the trees along the river. And I just was up on the cliff top, and one of them flew and landed on a bare branch, and I got a picture of it. So sort of a lucky shot. Supposed to be a common bird. We didn't see very many of them, but I'm really happy I got that picture. This is the other critically endangered macaw that lives in Bolivia. It's called the blue-throated macaw for obvious reasons. There are only about 300 of these in the wild, again, more in captivity in the United States. These islands, these birds live in what they call tree islands. So there's these flat plains, and then there'll be a little hummock that's got big trees growing on it. And they live in those tree islands. And you can see that it looks quite similar to the blue and yellow macaw, except that the throat is blue and the lines on the face are blue. And I'll show you on the blue and yellow macaw that they're different. So here, I really only saw a few of these birds, and there was only one that we saw perched. So all the pictures that I have here are the same bird. But I was pretty happy with the pictures despite the sky background because I wanted to get pictures of this bird. We actually put up some nest boxes for them that we had sent money to Jose to build the nest boxes, and we hung them for these parrots in the hopes that we could increase the number of nest sites that were available to them. And of course, with so few in the wild, they're critically endangered. The blue and yellow macaw's range overlaps with the blue-throated macaws, and you can see the difference here. See how he has a black throat and the feather lines on the face are black. Also have some green here that the blue-throated macaw doesn't have. But these birds were interesting. This was an interesting pair of birds. They were guarding this stump of a palm tree. We were told by the farmer that owned this land that they nested in this spot every year. For at least the past 6 years, and they wouldn't leave it because there was competition for the nest site. So they sat here even though it wasn't breeding season. They just guarded their nest site so they could have it when breeding season came. And here's another pair of them flying by. This is a picture of dusky-headed parakeets. These are pretty common birds. They're least concern, but they also lived on the tree islands with the macaws. You can see here's one that's in a nest hole on the side of a palm tree. I was really excited to see yellow-faced parrots. Yellow-faced parrots used to be considered to be in the genus Amazona, so they were called Amazon parrots. But they were a little bit different than the other members of the genus, and DNA sequencing, here we go again, shows that they're really not related to Amazon parrots, and they're really not related closely to any other parrot in South America. So they're pretty unusual parrots, and I was really surprised at how variable the coloring of the heads were of the flock that we saw. They're near threatened on the red list, so we need to watch them carefully. And this is when I made this talk, this slide was labeled red-shouldered macaw. And in the interval between 2 weeks ago, putting this talk together, and now this genus has had two subspecies that have now been separated into their own species, the northern red-shouldered and the southern red-shouldered macaw. They look very similar, but they're now two different species. So there are half as many of them as there used to be of the one species. But they are least concern. They're not very popular as a pet, and they're very adaptable to habitat. This is a scaly-headed parrot. It's a Pionus parrot, the same genus as the blue-headed parrot. They're known for their red vents. You can barely see the red feathers here. This parrot is least concern. We saw this blue-winged parrot was just pigging out on the figs on a fig tree, and the seeds from the fig tree were kind of sticky, so it got all this stuff all over its beak and it couldn't get it off. It was kind of funny to watch him try to clean his beak. This is the other genus of parrotlets, Forpus, again, small birds that look like parrots, but they're pretty small, and they are also least concern on the red list. This is a Mitred parakeet. A group of the parrots that used to be in the Caatinga genus are put into the Psittacara genus. They're all red with they're all green with various amounts of red on their head. This is a Mitred parakeet, the largest of them. They're really pretty beautiful. And we one of them just sat on a branch as we were hiking up the side of a mountain and let us take its picture. The last trip that we made to South America was to Colombia. We took this trip in March. We left on March 1st. We got back on March 15th. On March 17th, we started shelter in place in San Francisco. So we just barely squeezed it in. really had no idea we were squeezing it in, but things sure changed while we were away. This was a bird photography trip that I went with because a friend of mine was going, said, why don't we go together? Kathy came. And I was told that we might see one parrot species on this trip. I wasn't very happy about that, especially when I looked up and discovered that Colombia has 54 parrot species. But I sort of begged a little bit, and by chance we saw 4 species, and 2 of which were really quite rare, so it was kind of exciting. I have to say that I was a little bit worried about going to Colombia because, you know, they had a lot of gang warfare. They did sign a treaty, and who knew what the treaty was doing. But actually, we found the country really relaxed, really easy, pleasant. Lodging was great, food was great. And if you want to go, you should go. By this time, my shoulder was healed, so I was back to the 600mm lens. This is a yellow-eared parrot, a really true conservation success story. This is a bird that was thought to be extinct, and some ornithologists went to Colombia to look for them, and they couldn't find any. So they said, this bird is extinct. But another group made a second trip, and in one little valley, they found 81 of these parrots. So there were 81 of them were found in 1989, and now there are more than 2,000 of them in the wild. And what happened is that they recognized that they needed their habitat. And one of the most important things in the habitat was this species of wax palm, which is this really tall palm tree, really small trunk, and just grows. It's the tallest palm species. And they ate the fruits of this palm tree, and they nested in these palm trees. And so they started protecting the palm trees and planting palm trees. They talked to the local people, and the local people got really enthusiastic about this exciting parrot that lived in their area that wasn't found anyplace else. So there wasn't any more poaching of the birds. And all of this contributed to the growth in the population. The birds, they used to be critically endangered, and now they're listed as endangered. So a success story, although we still have a ways to go to get them back to what we think was their original population. And here's 2 more pictures of them. They were eating these little fruits, and just let us take their pictures. And I was just so excited. I thought there wasn't a chance in the world I was going to see these parrots, and it was just so exciting. And this is the other really rare parrot that we saw. It's called a golden plumed parakeet for the yellow feathers that run behind its eye. We were at a place taking pictures of hummingbirds, and I kept hearing parrots. And I'm pretty sensitive to hearing parrots. So I knew there were some parrots around, and I could see some birds flying way in the distance. And they finally landed so I could take a picture. And it was filling about, I don't know, a 20th of my frame with my 600mm lens and a teleconverter, 1.4 teleconverter. But I was able to at least see enough to say, oh my God, they're golden plumed parakeets. We've got to see them. But they just never came close to us. There was no way to get them. But on our way back, going back to our lodge from this place, we came across, we could hear them in the trees along the road. So we stopped and got out, and there were about 20 of them feeding up in these trees right along the side of the road. Now they were way up high, so we were shooting straight up, which is not really the best pictures, but I did see them, and I got pictures of golden plumed parakeets. And I'll tell you, if you look on the internet for pictures of them, they're hard to find. There's another picture doing some allopreening. The parakeets listed as vulnerable by IUCN, but they think there are fewer than 1,000 of them left in the wild. I think they're probably more endangered than vulnerable. But pretty exciting for me to see. I was really excited. We were one of the places we stayed at in Colombia. There was a nest of blue-headed parrots that was right next to a balcony, so you could sit on the balcony and kind of look across at the nest. And the nestlings were getting ready to fledge. You can see that this nestling is pretty much feathered. It doesn't really look like a blue-headed parrot because it's got some red feathers here and its head's not blue, but that's what immature blue-headed parrots look like. Its beak also has this dark on it. But I thought he was pretty cute. Got some good pictures of him. I was really happy to see that. The other parrot we saw, which was the one I was told we would see, were the spectacled parrotlets. And these were all over the place at one lodge we stayed at. They were nesting in tree hollows. They are actually, they were also nesting in bamboo logs that were used to build cabanas. So you can see here's the septum in the bamboo, and they've just punched a hole in it. They're nesting inside of that. This is the female, this is the male. You can tell that they're different color green, and the male has this blue around its eye that gives them the name spectacled parrots. Okay, so Steve, if I can ask you, I've got 10 minutes left. Should we leave the 10 minutes for questions? Because I've got a number more. The Costa Rica slides are slow, and I can just show that I can skip them, and we can just go to questions if you think that would be best.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Oh, all right. So we made a lot of trips to Costa Rica. It's one of my favorite places. Kathy's and my favorite places to go. We like it because it's really easy to get to. It's it's a pretty developed country with lots of ecotourism infrastructure, and they have lots of protected areas with lots of wildlife. They don't quite have as many parrot species as some of the places we've been, but there are 17 species in the country, and I've seen 11 of them. The first parrot I thought I'd show you pictures of are red-lored parrots. I'm going to say this, although I'm sure the audience all knows, the lores of a bird is the space above the beak between the eyes. So they're red-lored parrots because that area is red. It's not red-lored like the Lord of the Dance. It's lored because their lores are red. And I saw these on the Osa Peninsula. This parrot bird on the Osa Peninsula. Here's another picture. This is what parrots do when they wake up in the morning. They jump up on the top of a tree and they scream at the top of their lungs to let everyone know that they're awake. The red-lored parrots have two species. The northern subspecies has a yellow spot right here, but the southern subspecies that we're looking at here doesn't have the yellow. The great green macaw bird, I'm involved in conservation of this species, so it's kind of dear to my heart. They're listed as endangered right now because there are probably fewer than 1,000 of them in the wild, although they're being reassessed and maybe relisted as uplisted to critically endangered in the near future. They're really big macaws. They're almost as big as the red and green macaw. And they have this kind of subtle beauty with the various shades of green and blue and the red front. And here's a pair of birds allopreening. Parrots will allopreen like this. One bird preens the other where the other can't reach to preen. And it's sort of a bonding thing. It's part of courting ritual, and also the pairs will do this frequently once they've paired up to reinforce the bond. I have to say, this parrot makes me think it must feel pretty good too. And here's a nice in-flight shot with backlight. I really like that picture. These are brown-hooded parrots. These are least concern on the red list. This is a bird that is very difficult to see any place except one place in Costa Rica, where they come down to feed on fruit that's put out for the toucans. So you'll get a chance to take pictures of them. Their scientific name actually means red-eared. You can see a little bit of red feathers. He changes a lot from bird to bird. These have not very much. Pretty exciting to see them for a bird that you just don't get to see very often. And these are sulfur-winged parakeets. I was astonished. You'll notice they're sitting in apple trees. So you think I took these someplace like my backyard, but these were taken in the cloud forests of Costa Rica. A farmer had planted apples up there, and the apples were growing just fine. And he had set a little corner around, aside for the parakeets to come eat while he protected the rest of his apples so the parakeets wouldn't bother the rest of them. And you can go in, and the parakeets would come in, flocks of 20 of them would come in and just eat the apples. It was pretty cool. That's my favorite picture that I got in the apple orchard, even though it doesn't have apples in it. And then, of course, we saw scarlet macaws in Costa Rica. These macaws were eating the fruits of these palm trees. What they do is they'd grab a nut, and then they'd fly into the trees and perch and eat the nut, and then they'd fly back and grab another one. So lots of chances to get pictures of them, lots of chances to get in-flight shots. It's a great day. And here's allopreening by the scarlet macaws on this one on the Osa Peninsula. We saw crimson-fronted parakeets. In Costa Rica, this is another one of the Psittacara birds, again, the green birds with various amounts of red on their head. Pretty bird, least concern on the red list. These are orange-chinned parakeets. They're very common, small parakeet. Actually kind of have beautiful subtle coloring on their backs and wings, but they're least concern. They're pretty common in Costa Rica. And then for my last picture, I have this picture. You know, I'm showing you all these birds from Central and South America, but we actually have parrots right here in San Francisco. Everyone's heard of the Parrots of Telegraph Hill. And here's a picture of the parrots in San Francisco, sort of playing red light, green light on a stoplight by the Embarcadero. So thank you very much. I really appreciate having this opportunity to show you some of my parrot pictures. If you are interested in seeing more of my parrot pictures or other wildlife photos that I've taken, I have an Instagram site, and you can find it at CR_wildlife. Any questions?
So Corey, if you could unshare your screen, that would be good.
I just have to find where I can do it. Whoops, I lost it.
It'd be at the top somewhere.
Yeah, there. Nope. New share. Share. Where does it say unshare?
It should say stop sharing.
I wish it
The top on the red.
I'm sorry.
Right here. Right there.
Oh, there. I see it. Thank you. There we go. That better?
Yep. So everyone, yeah, if you have any questions, rather than speak up at once, it's probably good if you just ask your questions via chat.
So should I look at the chat then? Is that what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah.
We are there.
Hi, Doug. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Steve.
Well, any questions for me?
Right there. Right here.
Yeah, but
Comment on it?
it's not something for me to comment on.
Okay. Well, anyhow, I just want to say that was a great presentation, Corey. The photos are exquisite and it was so informative. I really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve.
Okay. Any questions?
Seems like people may be, do I have companion parrots? I don't own any parrots. I don't have anything against people having pet parrots. I would really, these days in the United States, of course, any parrot that you get is a captive bred parrot. I would caution people, if you're thinking of getting a parrot, that they're difficult pets. They're noisy. They have really strong beaks, so they bite really hard if they bite you, and they chew up your wood furniture if you let them, because they love to exercise their beaks by chewing wood. A lot of times a parrot will bond closely to one person, so that person will sort of be their mate, and there's a woman who wrote a book called The Parrot That Owns Me, which is worth reading if you're thinking of getting a parrot, where the parrot decided that she was the mate, and during breeding season, if her husband touched her, the parrot would attack her husband. So they can be, and they're social animals, so they're used to having lots of people around them. So you need lots of birds around them, other birds. So if you have them, you have to give them a lot of attention. And they can be good pets if you do all that stuff.
And Corey, they live a long time too, don't they?
Well, that's a good point. I always forget to mention that. So people exaggerate a little bit how long the birds will live, but it's not uncommon for a pet Amazon parrot to live 30 years in captivity. So if you buy one when you're 40, you may want to be giving it away when you're 60. So you've got to keep that in mind. The cockatoos live longer than that. And the macaws live a little bit longer than that. So if you don't get one when you're young, you may want to think about whether you should get one at all, unless you have provisions for where it can go. Whoops, now we've got a bunch of questions, I think.
I think most of them are compliments.
Dean and Jean said, thanks, it's my pleasure. Yep, again, my pleasure. Someone says they're destructive. Yeah, they really, so I have seen scarlet macaws and blue and yellow macaws pick up a Brazil nut and crack it in their beak. just to kind of give you an idea of how strong their beaks are. And someone says they're territorial. I think I mentioned that. I'm really pretty happy with the 500 millimeter PF, but that 600 millimeter lens just about can't be beat. It's just, I love that lens. I just wish it weighed 4 pounds less. All right. Someone else said parrots are expensive. They are. You have to have veterinary care. It does need to be specialized. And Edward Reed says, thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure. I really get a kick out of talking about parrots, as you can tell. I appreciated the opportunity. Do I use a tripod? Almost most of the time. And excuse me, the reason that I use a tripod is that I'm using that 600 millimeter lens, and it's really hard to handhold that lens because it weighs so much. The 500 PF is much easier to hold, handhold. The 200 to 500 I could hold also. So yeah, but the 600, and then when you put it, if you put a teleconverter on that 600, then it's focused down on such a small area that any movement that you make is hard for the camera to handle, even when it has the VR on. So yes, I use a tripod most of the time. All right.
Okay, so I think that concludes tonight's presentation. Thank you again, Corey. That was really great.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. Thank you, Steve.
And we'll see you all a month from now when Alex Navarro will be presenting on Birds of the Maya. So hope to see you all there.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night, everybody.